Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today we're going to be continuing our series reading from Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul by Jeffrey Wolf Green. These videos, we go through a long, hour-long reading of one guy's description of the sign. So it's very nice because it's based on his intuition, but he's long, painstakingly drawn out and illustrated each Pluto placement. And that's what we're reading today. Now, my Pluto actually happens to be in this place. In the fourth house, that is, not Cancer. I'm a Leo rising. My Pluto is in the sign of Scorpio. I'm in the Pluto and Scorpio generation. And Pluto is in the fourth house, conjunct my Sun and Mars. Now, the reason I'm saying this is just because, I figured you might be interested to know. It's important for me to always kind of, I'd like to give this caveat or this, interesting fact that since I'm a Leo rising, the Sun rules Leo, and the Sun therefore rules my first house. The first house has to do with your body, with the physical reality that you're born with and given in this world. My Sun is conjunct that Pluto and Mars in my fourth house. So this fourth house theme is going to relate to my basic identity and who I am, how I relate to the world. And Pluto has a lot of theme and heavy weight in my life. And this isn't it. The reason I'm telling you this is because there's so many, only certain people will be affected by Pluto in different ways and with different degrees of gravity. So look to where Pluto's lord is, that being the sign ruler. In my case, it's Mars. So Mars is channeling my Pluto, and it is conjunct my first lord. These are the kind of things that you want to look for to consider if your Pluto has more weight intact than just anybody else who might only feel Pluto as like a generational, a subtle energy whose influence isn't strongly there. Although in my opinion, as a Pluto person, I think Pluto works deeply. It's the deepest bottom groove of everyone's unconscious, and it is more there than I think most people tend to realize, in my opinion, and in my observation as an astrologer. I digress. So I'm excited to do this reading because Pluto is in my fourth house with my fourth house lord, and I relate to it a lot. So, with that being said, let's get down to it, folks. This is our reading of Pluto in the fourth house, or the sign of Cancer. Pluto in the fourth house, or Cancer, demonstrates that an evolutionary cycle is closing and that a new cycle is underway. This just happens in the cardinal angles and signs. It represents a new part of the cycle, a new integration into a new quadrant of the astrological seasons, the seasons of soul evolution. Individuals with Pluto in the fourth house have been attempting and desiring to learn the evolutionary lesson of security rather than deriving emotional security from any external factor, such as parents, job, lover, etc. These individuals have been learning to create and supply their own emotional security from within themselves. Now, because this evolutionary impulse is rather new, most individuals with a fourth house Pluto will have not completely learned this lesson. Thus, most will choose to be born into family situations wherein one or both parents produce a variety of emotional shocks that force the individual back in upon him or herself. Now consider that the fourth house is the foundation of the chart. It's technically what's under the earth, if you understand that. The 10th house, where the earth is. If the sun is in the 10th house, that means that it's midday and the sun is directly above us. But when it's midnight at the bottom of the chart, that's when the sun and whatever else is going on underneath is underneath the earth at that time. Cosmologically, this fractally reflects in the macrocosm or in the microcosm or whatever, as us, as the activity of the 4th house being what's underneath the subterranean unconscious framework of our psyche. And on Earth, this manifests typically as, it's the 4th house. It's a reflection of the 10th house. It's bound to relate to your parents, to the domestic reality, which shapes your emotional nature, your emotional reactions, because you have no control when you're a kid on the imprints that your emotional emotional reactivity takes. Now, commonly, one or both parents of the Pluto in the 4th house or in Cancer individual does not recognize, nor do they understand, the inherent individuality of you, the Pluto person. Your parents don't understand your individuality, and therefore the emotional needs of the individual go unfulfilled by the family, or at least that's the feeling. In this way, these individuals are thrown back upon themselves to enforce the evolutionary lesson of internal security and the minimization of external dependencies. These lessons take place or manifest totally within the emotional structure of these individuals, underneath the earth. The karmic and evolutionary lessons involve the nature and basis of the emotions, moods, and feelings, and the causes and sources of a particular mood, feeling, or emotion. Now, this kind of early environmental experience, if this is the heaviest, weightiest orb or globe affecting the person, that being Pluto, then this is a tough time in life, being in early childhood, tough time to have to deal with that mob gangster, uncontrollable surge of power energy that is Pluto. It's a tough time to deal with that kind of thing. As children, we are very sensitive and vulnerable because our sense of individuality, of who and what we are, is minimally defined. So we're taking it wholesale in a way. Our self-image, and therefore our sense of individuality, is impacted upon in a very large way by our parents and by our early environment. We tend to take in wholesale the messages from our cultural surroundings and from our parents. About 80% of 4th house Pluto individuals have had a series of prior life experiences in which their emotional needs have not been successfully met by one or both of the parents. In many cases, they'll be born into an environment in which their individuality and emotional needs are not recognized or met. It's not uncommon for these individuals to have a difficult karma or prior life association with one of or both of the parents in this life. Unresolved karmic issues. These prior life associations create memories that are held at an unconscious level. Thus, much of the interaction that can take place between child and parent is associated with compulsive emotional behavior patterns, whose origins are rooted in and caused by difficult life associations, past life associations. Much of the interaction that can take place between the Pluto and the 4th individual and their parents is based on compulsive emotional behavior that is rooted in or caused by difficult past life, prior life associations. That's what I'm trying to say. In cases of this kind, the specific nature of the prior life difficulty or karma must be determined by relating the individual's birth chart to the chart of one or both of the parents. In varying degrees of magnitude, these individuals will have emotional problems directly linked to a feeling of not being sufficiently nurtured, appreciated, or understood for who they are as individuals. Coming into this life, the memory associations from the past are ignited once again, as they experience the same kinds of environmental and parental situations. Now, this karmic and evolutionary condition creates very intense emotional needs from within, too intense, as well as intense emotions and feelings and moods. The unconscious expectation to have the parent meet these needs is the dynamic that actually creates the intense emotions, feelings, and moods when one of or both of the parents fails to do so, which is kind of impossible anyway. You have such a deep wellspring of these feelings that just seeking to be resolved all at once in a way that no parent in any position in life could possibly cater to. It is important to understand that the individual's experience and interpretation of his or her parents' behavior can be quite different than how one or both of the parents interpret their own behavior towards the fourth house Pluto person. You have the instinct to say that you're not being loved enough. Perhaps your mother says, "Are you kidding me? Do you know how many hours I spent helping you with your homework or doing this or that or having some kind of way of putting effort into you and their love into you, but it's not in the way that you want to be loved?" Sometimes that's on the parent, sometimes that's on you and the nature of your expectation from past life anticipation. The inherent insecurity that many of these individuals arrive in this life with creates a bottomless pit with respect to how much emotional nurturing that they require in order to feel secure. One or both of the parents may not be able to give the amount of emotional nurturing that the individual requires. The reasons may be very legitimate. For example, work or career concerns can remove the parents from the individual's immediate environment. As a child, the fourth house Pluto person does not have the ability to understand the legitimate reasons why both parents or one parent is not available. Thus, the individual interprets this situation at the time as not receiving the necessary amount of emotional nurturing that he or she requires. This triggers the prior life associations and memories, which in turn leads to the intense emotional states described above. Many of these people will just get this unconscious blockages of gunked up venom and resentment and hatred for the way the parents were, and the parents were just on their own journey, being their own individuals, trying to seek their own reality, trying to establish their own truth, for better or worse sometimes. Not everybody has the best parents, but there is definitely a streak in you, in this personality, to be resentful of ghosts that when you do some therapy is probably very good for this person, because then you can go back to your past life memories and say, was I really, you could talk to a therapist and you might react with deep emotional reactivity and resentment to things that your parents did, and say, God, I hate that my mother just didn't take care of me in the right way. She just spent so much time on other things. And the therapist would say, like, what? Like, what exactly do you mean? Like, what did your mother do for a living? Okay, well, and then so she worked at some place 9 to 5. She came home. She cooked you dinner. She would often want to, would she hang out with you? Yeah, she would. And she would want to watch movies with us and stuff. You know, over time, you might think that your mom actually did okay for a mom. It's just that you had this unconscious venom that was there for no reason, this ghost in the machine that didn't exist. So I would highly recommend considering therapy if you're at any point in your life and you find yourself welling up resentful, hateful venom for anything in the past. Spit it out. Do some ayahuasca. That was a big thing that I did at some point to let go of a lot of these things. If you don't know what ayahuasca is, look it up. It's interesting. But any kind of, some kind of experience that would allow you to reflect deeply on your past experiences and to let them go might be a good thing for you. In any case, from an evolutionary point of view, the triggering these intense past life emotional wants and needs and not getting them and having these emotional shocks, this is necessary because of the ongoing lessons in internal security and in the minimization of external dependencies that's going on for this person. In some other cases, some of these individuals will draw a parent who emotionally dominates their life. This is the type of parent who does not allow the individual to grow up, does it all for you. This type of parent desires to remain a central figure in the individual's life and will covertly or overtly manipulate the individual. In this situation, the parent asserts his or her own emotional needs and does not recognize the emotional needs of the child. In still other cases, one or both parents will manifest cruel, vindictive, or outright abusive behavior towards the individual. This type of behavior can take many forms and will manifest in varying degrees of intensity. We must determine the basis of the prior life associations between the fourth house Pluto individual and the parents in order to understand why these conditions exist and how to resolve them between the particular child and that parent. In many of these cases, the intense emotional needs that have not been met in the early environment will translate into emotional displacement. In other words, these individuals can form relationships with others in which they unconsciously expect and attempt to have their emotional needs met by another. In effect, these emotional needs are essentially those of a child. As a result, others can treat them as children and not allow them to grow up. It's because the child is deliciously holding on to the familiar past of not having to grow up. When another person gives it to you, you hold on to it, but then that other person becomes this overbearing parent vibe. All the emotional difficulties and the pain associated with these difficulties are compulsively projected upon others in varying degrees of intensity and expectation. The closer the fourth house Pluto person becomes to another, the more intense the projections and expectations. In intimate relationships, these individuals will unconsciously draw partners whose psychological makeup is similar to one or both of the parents. This is especially true in the earlier part of their life. Through emotional displacement, they are attempting to recover or experience, through perpetual demands, the early feeling of nurturing of their individuality that they did not have from one or both of the parents. Yet, because the partners are similar to one or both of the parents, this displaced need goes unfulfilled. Again, these individuals are forced back upon themselves. This cycle will repeat again and again until the fourth house Pluto person progressively learns how to understand why this kind of situation exists. They learn how to supply their own internal security and to emotionally mature through actualizing and establishing their own individuality through their own efforts. Kind of like the 10th house pole. The opposite to the fourth house is the 10th house, and that's what Pluto is looking to integrate without disintegrating its own position in the fourth house. In addition, they must learn how to minimize or eliminate all external dependencies of having their needs met by another, to be their own parent, or having their need for security dependent on an external situation. Until this lesson is accomplished, the potential is great to manipulate others emotionally in order to have their childlike and self-centered needs met. Emotional tantrums, rage, and anger, emotional withdrawal, crying wolf, or feigning desperation in one form or another, extreme fluctuations of moods, deep feelings of guilt. What did I do to deserve this? Why did I just do that? These are common symptoms until they understand the lessons that they are learning and the reasons for those lessons. As they learn to minimize their dependencies and resulting expectations, they will put their ongoing evolutionary lessons in motion. In some cases, intense emotions and needs translate into an utter fear of vulnerability. All fourth house Pluto people have extremely sensitive and touchy emotions. In certain cases, some of these individuals have learned how to cancel or deny their deep inner sense of emotional vulnerability and sensitivity. They have learned to do this through repeated lifetimes of emotional shocks, denial, and emotional manipulation by their families and others. This conditioned reaction is also based on life experiences in which the famous rug has been ripped out from under their feet. The rug of emotional dependency will always be pulled out from beneath them when the degree of dependency creates a non-growth situation, because this is what Pluto does. As a result of this conditional emotional reaction, these people will experience emotional suffocation and frustration in this life because they are not expressing their emotional needs or expectations. Many of these individuals will even deny that they have strong emotions and needs. Many will deny that they have any emotional problems at all. Yet, because the fourth house person is intrinsically sensitive, vulnerable, and needing to be touched on an ongoing level, because the fourth house person is intrinsically sensitive, vulnerable, and needing to be touched on an emotional level by at least one other, this conditional sorry, my book's giving me erection. It's a weird word, erection. Well, in any case, I'm going to say this one more time because, sometimes the grammar is weird in this book, but this is an important part. Thanks for your patience. Because the fourth house person is intrinsically sensitive, vulnerable, and needs to be touched on an emotional level by at least one other. This condition guarantees a lifetime or cycles within a lifetime of emotional suffocation, non-fulfillment, difficulties, and a negative self-image because of the suppression involved. Commonly, people who have reacted this way will draw to themselves others whom they can dominate and control on an emotional basis. Typically, the types that they draw will be emotionally weak or in need of some form of emotional healing. These others can themselves have unresolved or unfulfilled emotional situations revolving around one or both of their own parents. The fourth house Pluto individual will control and dominate by identifying the weakest point in another's emotional makeup. It will continually focus upon that weak point. In this way, they never allow the other to get away from their sphere of influence. They compulsively need to run the other person down, to tear them apart, in order to make the other feel as though the fourth house Pluto individual is indispensable in their life. It's kind of like a pimp and a hooker situation at the extremist, where the pimp says, "You're a piece of trash, you're not going to go anywhere in life without me," and then the hooker begins to believe it. It's a very extreme example, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people in that situation have this going on. Thus, by putting another down, they are elevating themselves, so to speak. And yet the other person is, in their own way, unconsciously placing these individuals, the Pluto and the fourth person, in a position of dominance and control relative to their own karmic and emotional needs, the needs of the other person, to be dominated. In this type of reaction, the fourth house Pluto individual guarantees the protection of their own vulnerability and essential insecurity on an emotional level for the time being. If this reaction is connected to unresolved anger or rage at one or both of the parents, the displaced emotional effect translates into taking this anger out on the other person that they draw into their life. This conditional emotional reaction, leading to the need to dominate and control, is a backhanded way of trying to fulfill their security and dependency needs. By being in a position of dominance and control, they maintain their relationship and fulfill the security issue. Yet, their deepest emotional needs will go unresolved in this kind of conditional reaction, because the people that they draw to them will be emotionally unequipped to help them get through this whole thing, because their needs are only making it even more, sparking it even more. The point to consider is this: emotional denial does not equal emotional security, nor resolution of the evolutionary and karmic necessities. Jeffrey Wolf goes on, this conditional reaction can also lead to situations in which these individuals attempt to dominate and control the environmental situations that they find themselves in. This kind of domination can occur through verbal or emotional dominance, or through silently injecting a negative mood. Those who are manifesting a childlike response to their life can project themselves in the same way. All too often, this tactic will draw negative vibrations back to the individual and will once again force them in upon themselves, especially if they start to believe their own negative intent, their own negative, "Oh, I'm in such a bad mood and I need things to change," and then they suck into that power that their negative moods cause. On a positive note, this effect can lead to the awareness of the inner dynamics that are creating these kinds of environmental effects in their lives, the internal emotional dynamics within you. In this knowledge, they can potentially make the necessary changes and realize the emotional evolutionary lessons involved. The emotional reactions of the fourth house Pluto individual can cyclically alternate between these two reactions. These individuals can alternate between seeking out places and people whom they unconsciously expect to fulfill their displaced emotional needs in a childlike way, or they can seek out environments and others whom they can dominate and control in order to have their unresolved emotional issues fulfilled in that way, to make others depend on them. These alternating cycles can occur within one primary relationship, or it can occur through the selection of different kinds of relationships or environmental situations at different times. That's crazy. I do relate to a lot of this. I'm in a primary relationship with my partner, and we go through these two dual things, and it's just a heavy thing to see it put in this way, I must admit. All fourth house Pluto individuals will experience the full spectrum of emotions, moods, and feelings in the most intense possible way. Every emotion is deeply felt. Because the intrinsic nature of Pluto is to understand the why of anything, the deepest core why, each mood or feeling or emotion is intensely focused upon. This fixation can be so total that the person can appear paralyzed and unable to act in any way other than the particular emotion dictates. Pluto can get to the bottom of the full bone structure of anything, and when you feel like getting into a trance to find out emotional depths, you can find them in yourself and in others. There's a great gift there, but it can be a double-edged sword if you need to go into that kind of trance-like inner protection and depth every time any simple emotional reaction occurs, right? In extremely rare cases, this dynamic can produce catatonic-like states. A classic example of this catatonic-like reaction is reflected in the last years of Friedrich Nietzsche's life, who had a fourth house Pluto, according to Jeffrey Wolf Green. Now, these moods, feelings, or emotions originate from unconscious depths, just like the seething lava beneath a volcano, under the earth. Commonly, some external experience acts as a trigger to induce the manifestation of these phenomena. Sometimes the individual becomes a victim of some emotional wind that just seems to manifest out of the blue. Thus, the individual can feel one way at a certain moment and then feel something else in the next moment. These individuals can seem, as a result, highly inconsistent in their emotional expressions and needs. I would say the strength of Pluto's Lord, the positive placement of Pluto's Lord, will reflect how capable the person is of stabilizing this Plutonian energy into a constructive fashion so that they can get with the turning tides of emotional needs and evolutionary lessons. In order to see if the person can get on that tide, check out the health and strength and positive aspects of whatever planet rules the fourth house, or the moon in the case of Pluto in Cancer. Of course, this dynamic can be just as confusing to the fourth house Pluto individual as it is to those that they interact with, this moodiness and these huge fluctuating emotions. These intense inner states must be experienced because they are the source of self-knowledge and the path to inner security. The challenge is to become aware of the trigger or stimulus producing the emotions, moods, and feelings, rather than just living it through without reflecting upon the origin or cause. Self-realization, journal keeping, these are all huge things for this type of personality. If these individuals make the attempt to understand the cause or trigger behind any given emotional state, then they can develop a penetrating insight into the nature of emotional dynamics. This insight can be applied to themselves and to others. It's a deep self-realization capacity here, a deep psychological understanding, a mind which can see one's own whole neurogenetic, cosmological, metaphysical, psychological framework and spine, psychic spine. They can view all the different layers of motive and impulse through the past, through their own past, and etc. And then they can express the same penetrating insight into the same network or metaphysical principles or psychic spine in others. You know, what I think is an incredible thing for you to do, you can't really see it right now, but I got a bookshelf over here, and usually I've got a whole bunch of my own personal notebooks. I got honestly 75 of my own personal journals where I'm constantly just writing the date and saying some kind of transformative experience that I've been through. Over time, I haven't even read a lot of them. It's just therapy to get it out. But as I go through, I'm constantly learning and reapplying and learning to get into the language of transformation and of my evolving persona. I'm getting a conscious grip on it and applying it through my own self-therapy through notebooks. That's my key. Art of any sort. I also write songs, and when I look at a song that I wrote in 2013, I can remember the state, the place that I was in, where I've come from since then. These are the kinds of things that you really ought to consider. Whatever kind of art you can use to express your soul in this moment, it will be useful to you when you look back at it and connect the spine of evolution in your own present life a couple years down the road. Something to consider, something that I've found useful. Now, these individuals will have two very distinct emotional cycles. On one hand, they will have a cycle wherein they are deeply withdrawn, silent, and desiring to be left alone and undisturbed until they become aware of what is causing a particular feeling. It's causing them to go and retreat, the fourth house, getting away from everyone, retreating into the shell to uncover the spiritual neurogenetic dynamics behind any impulse. They must withdraw because of the origin of the emotion is manifesting from subconscious realms. These are natural cycles for these individuals. So they must withdraw because the origin is in the subconscious. Once the awareness comes, the other emotional cycle will be triggered. And in this cycle, the second part, they will become animated, processing whatever it was that manifested from the subconscious realm. It's me with my notebooks, writing a song, whatever. So these are natural cycles for these individuals. It's the withdrawing and then the processing, the explosive processing. These alternating cycles can fluctuate wildly. They are inconsistent, unpredictable, and can change at any moment. It is important for these individuals to be involved with others who understand that they operate this way. Extreme problems and emotional confrontations can occur when others in the individual's life do not understand this natural process. This lack of understanding by others can lead to emotional scenes and confrontations wherein they attack the fourth house Pluto person in their necessary cycle of withdrawal. Others may read these cycles of withdrawal in an emotionally defensive way. They can feel threatened and insecure when the Pluto in the fourth house person withdraws and becomes silent. This will only aggravate the emotional reactions of the fourth house Pluto person because others are interfering with this natural cycle. Of course, the cycle is internal under the earth, fourth house, and we live in a world which is not under the earth. We are above the earth, and therefore confrontations will occur that can obstruct us from completely siphoning out and spewing out the venom and by withdrawing within ourselves. This is just the nature of Pluto in the fourth, is that we also have to integrate the 10th house, right? Being able to be solid and active and conscious and here and present in the world and amongst the pressures of external reality. Eventually, of course, we come to find that the Pluto in the fourth house person has been through so many of these cycles that they get a deep sense of how to rein it in so that they can go through any 10th house situation with a consistent sense of strength. That's why they say that any planet in the fourth house makes its way to being realized and manifested at its best strength later in life. For me, I've got Sun, Mars, and Pluto in that fourth house, and therefore all of those are going to have their highest strength later in life. That's what a lot of texts will say. But I digress. A very common source of the emotional states and difficulties affecting internal security and self-image issues is that most of these individuals have switched gender in the most recent, if not the last, life. A new evolutionary cycle has began in which these individuals are experiencing for the first time in a long time the opposite gender than what they have just been. The male has once been female, and the female has been male in the most recent prior lives. I have got a lot of that going on in my life. My life really deeply consists of the fun of the alchemy of this sort of thing. I've come through it for those who are interested. I consider myself gender fluid. I'm bisexual. But when it comes down to it, I have a girlfriend. We have a mostly, straight relationship. Although, again, we're both bi. And I do go through fluctuations of feeling feminine and wanting to be like this, childlike wonder, versus turning it around and being more of a dominating, throwing around sort of energy with my partner. And we really both fluctuate between both in a quite active way. This is something that's just very much there for me. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I'm a man. I'm a biological male. I got the meat and two veg. I got the dick and nuts situation. And I plan to keep it that way. I have found a safe space and an identity which correlates my soul in its present incarnation to my body. Ultimately, my soul, at the deepest end of things, I think, is transcendentally gender fluid at some levels. But in this incarnation, I've incarnated as a man. I almost feel like a lesbian, a woman inside a man's body. And now I have the equipment to go and give women the great pleasure that by having the equipment that I have. Although, of course, lesbians can give themselves a rock and roll time, too. But this seems to be the journey that this incarnation has led me towards. And I enjoy the challenge and the reward of being in a gender that is the yoga, the anti-tier, the match to my own past life gender. I do feel that, and it's only that much spicier by being that which I'm not used to, that which I'm familiar with, that which I'm not familiar with. So I've come through it as calling myself a man. Male is my pronouns, but you can call me any pronoun you want, actually. Lots of people call me a girl in this transgender world because I do present that way in a lot of ways, and people will just say, yeah, if you want me to call you they, I'll call you they, and I say, sure, what the heck. Or even female sometimes if people feel like it, if my girlfriend and I feel like it. But ultimately, I get around as being a male, being one gender, even though within that form there is a tornado of possible potential and activity and chaos. I still apply myself to a gender that gets me around in the world, and that works for me. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that way for you. The point is that I feel like I've gotten a hold of it, but I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't even claim that. You know, with stuff like this, it might sometimes just be best to consider that I'm down for whatever my nature entails. But I digress. Now, the fourth house, Cancer, and the moon all correlate to the Jungian psychological dynamic called the anima animus. It's the fourth house, Cancer, and the moon. The anima animus dynamic correlates to the basic fact that all people are intrinsically male and female. From an evolutionary point of view, each individual must experience the inherent polarities of maleness and femaleness. There is a natural and distinct law to the principle and experience of femininity and masculinity. Because there is a distinct law and principle to each, the psychological and experiential orientation to life will be naturally different relative to what gender an individual manifests through. Through natural evolutionary progression over many, many lifetimes, all of us will learn how to unite both halves of ourselves in a totally integrated way, rather than living or playing out the extremes of each to the denial or detriment of the other. Pluto in the 4th or 10th house will correlate to this gender switch. Other astrological symbols that can correlate to this gender switch are the south and north nodes in the 4th or 10th house, or the nodes being in Cancer and Capricorn, which I also have. I have the north node in Capricorn, doubling this sort of dynamic going on. Interesting that I have Pluto in Cancer with the north node in Capricorn. The childlikeness and the dominating character are intermittently taking the hot seat in my active awareness. A feeling of a feeling of security linked to gender can also be difficult to attain for the 4th house Pluto person. Many of these individuals will not relate to themselves well in their present gender, especially considering the conditional ways that particular cultures define masculinity and femininity. I myself am a man who had a lot of trouble with it because I'm so feminine. I'm actually, there's a long time where I thought that maybe I'm actually a woman. I've never considered transforming my biological gender because I dig what's been given to me. But for a long time, I considered myself a lesbian in a man's body. And, calling myself a man now is even a hard thing to do these days because of the way our society defines masculinity. If people expect me to fulfill the role of masculine, I don't want it. I'd rather stay in the non-gender neutrality thing. Although I define masculinity in my own way, and that's why I kind of use it as my main pronouns and things, right? But I digress. Because most of these individuals have been relating to themselves in the opposite gender in the most recent prior lives, the hormonal and gender switch becomes its own source of emotional conflict. This conflict, again, is based on the fact that the emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and physical structure of man and women are intrinsically different. This conflict can be reduced in magnitude if this is not the first or second time the person has come back in that gender. This process is similar to buying a new pair of shoes. The more the shoes are worn, the more comfortable they become. Cool. They become our shoes. In certain cases, this condition can be aggravated by one or both of the parents. As an example, a client of mine who had a fourth house Pluto was brought up to be a female, even though he was a male in this life. The mother wanted to have a little girl. Her anger and resentment of the fact that her child was male manifested in this type of behavior towards this man. Obviously, this early environmental impact devastated his self-image and emotional structure because it was kind of being enforced in that heady sort of way. Of course, this probably happens all the time to people who are born as, this is the opposite that we would expect. Most of the time what happens is that a boy is born with the male body parts, but might actually feel like a woman on the inside. But the parents say, no. Johnny gets the blue room and Janie gets the pink room, right? All of these factors contribute to the continuing evolutionary lessons of inner security, which is the real root of this whole thing that we're talking about, this gender switch thing. Looking to have some kind of identity that is what you want to be, what you want to express your power through. And if you can't pick a gender, you're going to have to deal with the world of not having a pole to attract towards or to attract from or through. Non-gender people can still attract and still do that, of course, but not through the polarity of gender. And that has its own power, its own mysterious ways. Now, these individuals are learning to know and trust themselves so that they can know and trust others. Until they trust and know themselves, they cannot really know and trust another. In fact, many of these individuals will come into this life naturally mistrustful and suspicious of others and their motives. This lack of trust is based upon having been dumped on in situations or with people in whom they have been overly dependent. For many of these people, this lack of trust is also based on unconscious memories of experiencing emotional rejection or non-responsiveness by one or both parents in the most recent prior lives. I'll read that again. For many of these people, this lack of trust is based on unconscious memories of experiencing emotional rejection or non-responsiveness by one or both of the parents in the most recent prior lives. And many will have this similar experience again in this life. The only real antidote for this condition in this life is for these individuals to get to know and trust themselves, i.e., the nature and basis of their emotions and self-image, and to stop looking for security through external situations or through other people. Some individuals with the fourth house Pluto will be exceptions to all these above situations. Through prior life efforts, these individuals will have already learned the lessons of inner security, the minimization of external dependencies, and the acceptance of their own unique self-image. Generally, about 20% of the fourth house Pluto individuals have made real efforts to learn these lessons before. Such individuals will be born into a family in which one or both parents contributes positively to these ongoing lessons. I think I'm kind of in this category, at least where my mother is concerned. At least I think so. Try to keep to the text of the book here. These will be parents who promote a positive self-image and encourage the individual to stand on their own 2 feet and do not permit excessive dependency. In some instances, the fourth house Pluto individual will be born into a family that does not supply this support, yet the individual is not negatively impacted. These individuals will simply use that kind of family and environmental situation to further their evolutionary needs. Even in these cases, however, the emotions, mood, and feelings described earlier will certainly occur in varying degrees of intensity and frequency. In such individuals, these emotions, moods, and feelings will occur for 2 reasons. 1, when the nature and structure of their reality becomes stagnated. And 2, when internal or external environmental circumstances manifest in such a way as to trigger an unconscious memory based on their other past lives. A case history will serve to illustrate this process and condition. So here, Jeffrey Wolf Green is going to give us a little example chart. Now, this is a case history. This individual has a fourth house Pluto in Leo. Their south node is, so, here we're going to unfold Jeffrey Wolf Green's version of how to interpret Pluto, especially through a combination of a reading of the north node and the south node. If you want to learn more about the dynamics involved in this little case study, check out the beginning of this playlist if you're watching the Pluto Evolutionary Journey of the Soul series, where we go into more detail about the dynamics involved here. But you'll be able to get the gist of what's going on here. So in this case history, this individual has a fourth house Pluto in the sign of Leo. Their south node is in Virgo in the 5th house. And the ruler of Virgo, that being Mercury, is in Capricorn in the 9th house. Right? So here we see, try not to be too loud on the mic. Come on, my camera's always fuzzy. There we go, almost. So we've got Pluto down there in the 4th house. I'm trying to make my camera, this always happens. Come on, stupid. Anyway, you can see the Pluto is in the 4th house in Leo. The south node is in the sign of Virgo in that 5th house. And the south node's lord, Mercury, is in Capricorn in the 9th house. So the way that the person gathers and garners the foundation of energy that they use to hack at this evolutionary lesson, what they found themselves through is the 5th house in Virgo, which can get to be too much. It can get to be too familiar because of the past life emphasis. But they need that energy in order to apply themselves to the evolutionary dynamics here. So this individual is in the individuated or spiritual evolutionary condition. What Jeffrey Wolf means by that is that every time he gives a case study, he gives an example of Pluto in its position, and he always reminds us that every chart is not inherently good or bad. The evolutionary impulse of the individual, from the totality of their whole chart, they can be at different stages of evolutionary reckoning with regards to the figures in the chart. if a person who's at a basic non-evolutionary state, they're going to manifest the chart in a different way than someone who has been learning to understand the dynamic. Now, this individual here is in the individuated, leaning towards the spiritual evolutionary stage. The sattvic, in between the rajasic, going towards the sattvic sense of things. This girl was born into a family in which both parents could not recognize her individuality or her emotional needs. The parents themselves were in the herd state of evolutionary conditioning. She simply used this kind of family to continue her own evolutionary lessons without needing to confront or, completely smash their spiritual level upon their herd state parents who could not conceive of where she was at. Instead, that would be throwing your pearls before swine, wouldn't it? With that south node in Virgo in her 5th house and Mercury in the 9th house in Capricorn, she was naturally introspective, self-analytical, and critical, and intrinsically oriented to understanding herself and life in metaphysical and cosmological terms, especially that Mercury in Capricorn in the 9th house. Her sense of personal identity and self-image were linked to metaphysical and cosmological perspectives and intuitive feelings. On balance, this individual was generally a happy-go-lucky type because of her ability to see the humor in most things. Here we have the ruler of the south node in the 9th house, the optimistic humor of things. She more or less knew why she chose or came through the kind of parents she had because of her evolutionary condition, and she could apply it as a challenge to stand up for her sense of self, even when her parents don't understand where she's going. However, her emotional needs as a child were not met. Her father, for example, was an alcoholic. Early in her life, this factor made her go deeply within herself. Subconsciously, she felt that she was being punished in some way. It's the South Node and Virgo vibe. Thus, she felt she deserved and was responsible for this kind of family situation. She held no malice towards her parents because of this early denial of her emotional needs. So her perception that there was these emotional needs not being met, she didn't take it personally from her parents. She took it personally from her own karma, which is a little bit twisted in its own right, but that's the difference between the herd state and the individuated state. The spiritual state is her beginning to see that even it happening to her is part of a deeper pattern. So she did not realize she held no malice towards her parents because of this early denial of her emotional needs. She said, oh, this is just what it is, and I'll just deny my emotional needs even though my parents can't supply it, right? What she didn't realize was the impact that this early denial had on her emotional nature because of the inherently suppressive pattern symbolized by the ruler of the South Node being in Capricorn relative to the 4th house Pluto. Only when her father died did all of these suppressed emotions, feelings, and the resulting moods surface. She was in utter shock at the depth and intensity of these emotions. And yet, this event served not only to let out these buried emotions, but also to show her how they had subconsciously dictated the type of partner she had become involved with. This partner was unable to give her what she needed on an emotional level. In addition, her partner was emotionally unable to understand who she was and what she needed as an individual on an emotional basis. This realization promoted an attempt to redefine her relationship. Up until this point, she even denied she had intense feelings, moods, and emotions. It took this kind of emotional shock, one of the ways that Pluto instigates our evolutionary necessities, to make her aware of all of these issues. As a result, deeper self-knowledge inevitably occurred to her. The polarity point of this position is the 10th house, or Capricorn. The evolutionary intent is one of self-determination, learning how to accept responsibility for one's own actions, leading to emotional maturity, learning how to walk on one's own 2 feet, and learning how to integrate or establish one's own personal authority or individuality in the context of society or culture, being an original in those around you, because you have such a deep sense of yourself and the self that has been dissolving, shedding snake skin, shedding this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, through deduction. Something is an original sense of self that can permeate any work that you do in the 10th house sphere. Now, when the 4th house Pluto person acts upon these evolutionary intentions, then the child becomes an adult. They will learn that the responsibility for their life situation rests within themselves. By developing inner security and minimizing dependencies, somebody make it happen for me. These individuals will learn how to trust themselves, know themselves, and ultimately very deeply know others. They will also learn how to be healthy adult children. We all have a child in us who are able to be vulnerable and sensitive in a positive way. To apply this sensitivity and childlike wonder whilst not reducing or bringing into question the integrity and truth of your strength and self-authority. By learning how to accept the responsibility for their own actions, these individuals will stop blaming others for their self-created problems or life conditions. In this way, they can even learn to understand the role that their parents played in creating the necessary evolutionary lessons. Perhaps they will learn to see their parents as just people who have various strengths and weaknesses, that they are just people who happen to be their parents. Those in an individuated state and in the spiritual state, the higher, learning what the nature and dynamics of this condition are and how to take best alchemical vantage of them. These people can realize the karmic conditions and issues involved and resolve to correct the situation in whatever ways necessary, through yoga, through sacrifice, especially through karma yoga, these sorts of things. By making a self-determined effort to actualize the right work or career, they will create a counterpoint vehicle through which the work environment allows for a natural reflection upon the sources, origins, and causes of the feelings. Through this process, the individual gains personal knowledge and progressively develops control over their emotions, moods, and feelings. As the causes become known through reflection, these individuals will progressively be less inclined to be swept away, thus out of control with their shifting emotional states. Sorry, I'll read that again. As the causes of these emotional fluctuations become known through reflection, only through reflection, through consciously looking at it, contemplating, meditating, calming your mind, seeing through all of the smoke of all of your emotional programming throughout your life. After it all, and the causes become known, these individuals, you, will progressively be less inclined to be swept away and to become out of control with their shifting emotional states. The degree of emotional empathy that fourth house Pluto individuals can feel for others will allow them to help others understand their own natures. They can encourage self-determination for others and can help others accept the responsibility for their own actions. In addition, they can help others understand the nature of their own emotional blocks and help or encourage them to minimize their own dependencies. In advanced evolutionary conditions, these individuals can achieve a total and equal integration of their masculine and feminine components, the anima-animus dynamic. Cool. This evolutionary metamorphosis will produce individuals who are able to identify their goals in life and, via self-determination, actualize them through their own efforts. It's a beautiful position to be in. Pluto in any cardinal house is bound to kick up a lot of dirt and dust, but that usually lets you know that where there is smoke, there is fire. And this can make for an incredible shamanic alchemy that can do a lot of good for the world through self-realization, which has always been one of my primary motivations in life. That's why I'm an astrologer, that's why I'm a musician, and that's why I'm here with you folks today talking about Pluto in the 4th. Now, that is the end of our reading today. There's just a few little things left to go over. Jeffrey Wolf Green always gives us some common characteristics of the Pluto in this, sign and house personality at the very end. So some common characteristics of the 4th house Pluto person include emotionally intense and demanding, overtly or covertly expressed, cycles of depression and optimism, can be emotionally manipulative, insecure, defensive, and easily threatened, potentially cruel, mean, or vindictive if deeply wounded, but also empathetic, sympathetic, nurturing, and positive cycles, intensely loyal to those close to them, and they are needing to control their personal environment or space. Some famous people with Pluto in the 4th house or Cancer include Maya Farrow, R.D. Laing, Norman Mailer, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Wolfgang Mozart. Let's just go through some of these here. This is the chart of Maya Farrow. Drawn by Jeffrey Wolf Green. Here's R.D. Laing. Feel free to pause the video if you want to just give these charts a study at any point. Norman Mailer. Is that Pluto and Cancer in the 4th house? Friedrich Nietzsche. And let's sit there. And most interestingly of all, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Very intrigued. Would probably be an interesting chart to read. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Pluto in Cancer and in the 4th house. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I always love talking with you guys about this stuff. I'm Dustin Cormier. That was a wonderful time. Let me know in the comments if you dug it. Feel free to drop a like if you did like it. And if you're enjoying the way I do my thing, feel free to subscribe as well, because I can assure you that, it's December 2020 right now. We're doing lots of COVID, staying inside things right now in the world. And so I've got lots of time to spend doing videos and putting more out for you guys are enjoying. So I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you guys on the flip side. Thanks so much for joining me today.